Have you got your tea?
Okay.
You good?
Got my tea.
You got your tea. I've got my tinny and tea.
A little fortune cookie.
Nice. So Robyn, we are here in Generator Projects, gonna talk about our experience within the creative community. You're putting on a face which shows discomfort, and there's no need for it because it's just a chat. Why are you so uncomfortable?
Talking about my art makes me want to die. But if you think it's important, then I believe you.
Fucking hell, I know it's important, Robyn. So, for background for all the listeners who are going to be listening to this, I've known Robyn since we were tiny bairns, growing up in a small town village in the northeast of Scotland, along the A96, where it was full of fucking Tories and full of farmers, and we were part of a different kind of class, which was within that. Although in saying that, my house was out with of Castle Hill, so...
I actually always thought you lived in a posh house, but just because it's in a slightly different... 2 streets over.
Well, the thing is, my house was an ex-council house, but just outside of Castle Hill, so therefore it was classed as being posh.
Yeah.
Or classed as being, not within... It wasn't one of the fancy houses, but it was definitely...
Definitely wasn't one of the fancy houses. Knowing what I know now, if I'd known then,
It wasn't Murrayfield, it was Newcastle Hill, so it wasn't considered in the same kind of bracket, which was what we knew within Falkburrs, because it being a town of 4,000 folk, the class divide was really, really apparent, especially when you're in your... whereas you got Dundee, where you have different schools for different classes, we had everyone all mixed into one, so it was really a lot more apparent for us.
Yeah, it feels like there's such a... I'm not going to say like a lack of working class people there, but I almost didn't really know I was working class because everyone felt the same to a point, and you get kind of halfway through high school and you start going to people's houses and you're like, oh God, these people are really rich and I've never known. It's not like you walk down the street and there's like a nice part of town and a bad part of town. It's all kind of together.
Did you ever have someone from a posh house, like a well-off person, come to your house and say, oh, it's cosy?
Oh God, no. I never had many people over. My mum and dad had me really young, so they were they were like the rebels of the street. And yeah, all of the other people in our street, the parents were friends with each other, and they would go over to each other's houses for wine, and my mum would blare rave music out of the window and like paint her ceiling green, and so no one would really come round. And the one time I did have someone over from my class, it was actually a teacher's daughter. My mum has ADHD and is really scatty, so her timing is always off. She's late for everything. She'd made dinner really late, and he turned up as she was playing it up, and he knocked on the door, and she opened it, and he took a look in and heard the music. And she was like, do you want to come in? We're just having dinner. And he was like, no, I'll just go. I'll just take her now, and like ran away. And after that, I felt like, God, I don't even want to have anyone here.
Would you like to name him? Because we can, if you want to.
Do you remember Mr. Sutcliffe? Do you remember Mr. Sutcliffe? Yeah,
he was a stuck-up bastard.
Yeah, I always thought that he was really intellectual, really artsy. His children are very artsy, very talented. But you can afford to be talented when you have unlimited resources, can you?
That is true. You can afford to be talented when you've got unlimited resources. Yeah. That's actually the most beautiful way of putting it.
Make mistakes, live your life, explore, absorb the world. But you can't absorb the world when you're poor. You just have to...
You've actually nailed a massive part of my insecurity when I was at art school right on the head there. You can afford to make mistakes when you've got money. When you're well off, you can afford to make mistakes. I found it so difficult at art school to take risks because those risks would have a financial impact. So for me to go and learn how to paint, I knew I was going to waste money on paint, whereas the well-off kids could just afford to splash paint on their bodies and jump up against it like Tobias Funke. They could do that shit, but I couldn't, because I made that really clear during my masters to my tutor Tracy. I was like, I can't take a risk. There's a whole blockage that's stopping me from taking a risk, because I know that if I fuck up, I've got to pay for that, and it's not even like paying for it just financially. There's an emotional attachment to that, paying for it. If you fuck up as a poor person, you fucked up. And that's actually exactly it.
I actually kind of feel this extra level of connection between like leftist, like anti-capitalist spaces and communities where art is supposed to be seen as this expression and you're seen as like selling out if you make any money for it, whereas for me a lot of my work is quite commercial. And when I think of what I make, like quite often I do have who I want to see it in mind, because my mindset has always been, okay, what can I do to make money? Whether that's like I'm going to put a gig on and I'm going to enjoy it, but it needs to make money. Like I don't have that yet comfort of frivolous joy.
Yeah, God, imagine having that.
Yeah.
Imagine just having the free-spirited security that if you did just do something for the sake of joy and it had no financial outcome as a reward, then think of the things that we would be able to kind of achieve. But then we don't have that mindset at all.
Yeah, exactly. I guess that's why you see so many people who become artists in their later life and they've made their money or they're retired or whatever and they can just potter around.
That's it. That's like in Money School of Art, where I did my undergrad. It was me and 9 other women in my year who had all come to art after they'd retired. And because they felt like at that point they could take the risk. Whereas prior to that, they couldn't. And they weren't all necessarily, they weren't working class, fuck no. They were middle class women who had gone through things and had earned up everything and they didn't have anything left to lose. So they could afford to take the risk of doing art. But for me going into that, I felt like I had no other option. Because what else could I do? I can't, run a business now. I could go and do an actual viable job? No, the only thing I could do at that point was art and read. And so there was no other option for me, and so I had to make it into a financially viable income stream for myself, which obviously didn't happen.
It's interesting that you think of it that way. I guess for me, I never went to art school, never even took art in high school, and I always and still do feel really excluded from those spaces. And yet me even to apply to art school or to ask to put on an exhibition, I feel like that space isn't for me because I'm too poor and I'm not I don't have the network or the language or the vocabulary or the theory behind it, when I know I've gone through a big journey of self-reflection and I know that that's not true, but I guess being 19, 20, it's just that's not for me. Yeah,
and to be honest, I take a massive responsibility in that, because I have known you for years, and you've seen me through my art school years, and I was like, art is only for these people, and art is because of this, and not all art is art. And during my art school days, I was an absolute asshole, and I totally played into the whole elitism of art, and I understand now how that impacted the people around me, including you.
It's the classic curve, isn't it? When you start, you're I know everything, and this is very black and white, and then the more you know, you're I actually know nothing.
That's it. That's exactly it. I know that, I think knowing the art world to the extent I know it now, I understand the level of bullshit that has to be subscribed to in order for you to actually make any impact. And now, having gone through that process of learning about art, understanding the level of bullshit you have to subscribe to, as I've just said, and then knowing that it's just bullshit. And that's actually one of the beautiful things I know about you and your artwork, is that bullshit was never sitting well with you. You never were subscribed to that bullshit. You understood it, you saw it, you took it in, but it's actually never been a part of your practice, the bullshit, which is something for me to be able to observe that within your work, which is so raw and so beautiful and also accessible.
Yeah, I think my work's truly nothing but feelings. It's me just feeling some type of way, and because I'm so forgetful, trying to make something that allows me to focus on that feeling or thought for a couple of hours, and then after I've got something I can look at as a reminder to I guess a lot of it's quite positive. And yet to think, I don't want to feel that negative way. I want to stay in this moment. And I want other people to feel that way too and feel like things aren't rubbish. I think quite often when people look at my work, they think, you must be such a positive person, but I'm just not. You know, it's like quite the opposite. It's like a reminder of, it's like a reminder to me to try be that way.
That's like a really, that's clicked a thought in my head about this idea that when people who have had to experience a level of sadness or darkness or insecurity or any kind of depressive episode, like anything that kind of puts their state into a dark place, they're the ones who are able to access lightness and happiness more easily. Like, if you had an experience that was purely happy, the slightest little inconvenience would make you depressed. Yeah. But because you personally have gone through that process of exploring your mental health, and because you've come to terms with insecurities and you've found ways in which to bring lightness into dark spaces, that makes you someone who's not scared of the dark and able to bring the light. You know?
Gorgeous.
Yeah. Well, that's Scorpio.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think it's all just like part of a bigger coping mechanism that isn't like repressing my feelings, which is, I think when you're like talking of being working class, you grow up in, there's no space to feel sad. There's no space to really feel any type of way that's not like conducive to capital or conducive to like a way out of it. And then, yeah, like I guess moving away from home and being a little bit more stable in my life, I was able to like address those feelings and really feel them and work through them, and that even in itself is a privilege.
Oh, it's really nice to see that, though, to hear that as well. To go like the fact that I've been offered the opportunity to work through my experience is a privilege. Like, it does. There's so many people who are within our networks, our familial networks, our class networks, our where we grew up, who've not been offered that opportunity to be able to expand and to explore, who then go and do their job because they're told that's what they need to do, and then come back home and watch Coronation Street. Not saying anything's wrong with Coronation Street. I'm sure Coronation Street is great. I'm personally a Hollyoaks household. So and apparently that's a whole thing in itself. My children were really upset at me when I told them that.
Just Hollyoaks after dark for me.
Ooh. Like I was going to say Scorpio. Okay. So let's talk about, if you want, well, if you're okay with it, would you like to talk about your work and tell us about your work?
So I guess a lot of my work, it's like 2D illustration. A lot of it's very pink, pastel, like very like high femme aesthetic, with lots of like positive, like affirming messages in it. A lot of the imagery I use is of like fat bodies or like non-conventionally attractive bodies, just like an array of people. I like to draw lots of women, because women are great.
Women are hot.
Who doesn't want to draw them? Yeah.
Men are not as nice to look at.
Men not nice to look at.
Women nice to look at.
Oh my god.
Sorry,
we're
sorry.
awful. Yeah, so it's, I guess, that kind of stuff. Really bizarrely in my day-to-day life, I don't know, I kind of go in and out, but I don't think my aesthetic in life is like high femme, pastel pink. But when I started doing those drawings, it felt like, as a fat person, I had never been able to have that kind of very glamorous, like high femme aesthetic, and it felt like in order to be cool or look normal, I had to dress in a way that suited my body. And so my illustration work felt like a way to kind of access that like really feminine part of me that I felt inside, but I wasn't able to like express through the way I dressed. And as well, like I think, there are a lot of like pink drawings out there, and I think can be really easy to dismiss them as just like, oh, that's a girl drawing. But it feels really powerful to me that like, as a woman, I should be able to reclaim that aesthetic, and it feels important that there should be power attached to like high femme pink glittery thing. Because
from knowing you for such a long time, and personally, you never came across as like that high femme. You were fucking goth as fuck.
Super goth.
So goth with 2 Fs. Like, you were extremely gothic. And metal being a massive part of your upbringing, and you used to put on gigs and you used to promote music and you make music as well, which is very rarely talked about. Your music is very, very important and to me.
Aww.
Like, and I'm pretty sure if I'm in there's other people who are really going to be inspired by your music as well. And like that's, so by able to take an adoptive approach that's kind of contrast to what you usually present is an empowering thing.
Yeah.
It's taking on a different kind of like route and able to take ownership of things that maybe expand your identity, also inform your identity.
Absolutely. Like I think maybe even all of the spaces that I inhabited growing up were dominated by men, and not just any men, like really classically toxic, like toxically masculine men, especially in like the metal and rock and punk scenes. And I was always made to feel like I was someone's girlfriend, or I was an afterthought, or why was I there? I would often wear t-shirts and people would be like, oh, is that your boyfriend's t-shirt? And so yeah, always like felt like I was trying to fit in to a man's world. Oh god, 1950s. And so yeah, for me that like doing that style of art feels good. It's like I can do this and it's all me and you don't have to look at it, and this is for me, and it can also be for you, but yeah, I don't have to amend who I am to fit in, to be part of anything. I can just make my own thing for me and it feels really nice and safe and comfortable.
The fact that you can make your own stuff for yourself and it feels safe, that's...
Yeah. Lots of brand collabs. Yeah.
You're extremely successful. I look at you and I'm like, oh my god, I managed to sell a work for 30 quid and I'm always over bold. Is that over bold? No.
Don't think
Overwhelmed?
Overwhelmed.
Like by how successful you've been and you've managed to kind of... And it's because of this fearlessness you have with your artwork and taking risks and going outside of your comfort zone, which is something that is not actually that often apparent within people within the working class community, because a lot of us kind of have that imposter syndrome that comes from it. But you have fearlessness of overcoming that, although I'm sure you feel it, but at the same time you're like, fuck it, I want to make money.
Yeah, I think my whole approach is... I actually think through not having to go through any of those like artist networks or do shows or build a reputation that way, I avoided that all completely, or like having to speak to people face to face. When I started making the work, I was extremely depressed and extremely isolated, and I just had the internet and I completed it and just started telling people like, this is my work, I am an artist.
Did you say you completed the internet?
No, I completed the work. Sorry, my work.
I wouldn't be surprised if you completed the internet.
Yeah. And just like, I guess I've always just presented myself as like the best version of me, or the person that I think that I should be. Kind of fake it till you make it in a way, I guess. But I think so many people present themselves as like, I'm just a first year, or I'm just a silly little artist. But you just have to go big or go home, don't you? Like if you're not...
Yeah.
If you're not going to put yourself out there, what are you doing it for?
Fucking yeah. Absolutely right.
Yeah.
Also, the one thing I want to come back to is like, so your work does exhibits a lot of body positivity. You talk about fatness and you talk about the fat experience as well. And that is something that we know is associated with working classness. Mm-hmm. And very famously, Ellie Harrison with her Glasgow effect and the connotations that came with that. Do you mind talking about that, or do you want to talk about that?
No, yeah, we can talk about it.
Because I think that's quite a... Because as someone who positively advocates for fat acceptance and for body positivity, body acceptance, and for just the human rights acceptance of people who do not have a conventionally attractive body, just like the basic human right that we all have to be accepted as human beings regardless of what we look like. I think that, the association with fatness and working classness is a really interesting topic, and I think that they come both hand in hand. Obviously, Ellie Harrison was on my tours and I really love her, but I also understand that there's a lot of associations in what she did with the Glasgow effect that were really insensitive. I don't want to talk about that necessarily, just because I brought it up. I just want to make sure that Ellie Harrison knows that I do actually like her, even though I did say that, but like, do you feel like the ownership of fatness, of body positivity, body acceptance is associated with the ownership of working classes, or is this something separate? Like, don't know, I'm not even asking the question.
No, it's really interesting. It is interesting because for me, the idea of like owning your own body never really changed for me until I started reading more about it, or until I was in spaces with people who maybe had studied it, you know? And so I feel like there are real barriers there in understanding yourself and how you're perceived by the world when you are working class, because you're not allowed, like, those ideas are kind of gatekept, you know? And for me, I guess, like, the internet has been great, so I just follow lots of really fat, really lovely, hot, wonderful, talented people. But I still actually feel like a lot of shame attached to it. You know, I know, like, when I started out posting my work, a lot of the people I would draw were like straight size, conventionally attractive, and I found that really interesting looking back, because that's not who I am, and that's not, like, you know, I'm thinking, who am I trying to represent there? And it was only maybe a year into my work where I was like, I'm going to draw my body, and I'm going to draw the people that I want to see. And I think that was a shame attached to posting my work and having people that I know see it and them think, oh my God, is she fat? Whereas they already know I'm fat because they know me and they see me. So yeah, it's been a bit of a journey for me, and I think definitely drawing fat people and posting more like body critical work, it makes me think about it more. It makes me feel more like positively about it.
It's like, I feel in a similar kind of vein. My body, although it used to be fat, now it's average, but it still is a post-pregnancy body. And I've had that since I was 18, because I was a teenage mum. And one of the things I feel like it is a class issue, because teenage pregnancies is a class issue.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like the underrepresentation of post-pregnancy bodies within the media is actually a class issue. Mm-hmm. And I'm finding that more and more. I'm like, I don't even have a very positive representation of post-pregnancy bodies within porn. Even within a media which is sexually exploitative of feminine bodies, there's not even that acceptance. I mean, there is some. They're just they're not the ones I'm into. I'm not going to wank over those. Mm-hmm. But like, sorry, was I a bit rude?
No. We all watch porn, guys.
We all do, even if you don't admit it. So like, it's for there be such an underrepresentation of post-pregnancy bodies is showing there's a massive, for me, I think it's a whitewashing or a class washing of what could sexualized bodies be. Is that saying a poor body which has gone through the process of pregnancy, especially so young as what mine did, does that mean it's not sexually attractive? And I still struggle with that so often, that there's no representation of a saggy belly or saggy tits or stretch marks. And that's something that my body has undergone since I was 18. And although I have been fat and I have gone through the process of trying to understand body positivity, especially for my daughter, who is working class, underclass, and bigger, and then her experience of what her body is within a social construct, and then there's and then my body, which has gone from fat to then average, and then it still bears the scars of my class. Mm-hmm. Like, at what point am I going to feel like it's going to be sexually attractive or even accepted? Because I have no problems getting my kit off, you know what I'm like, especially if I'm on drugs. And that was said very quiet, but it's also, this is my show, I can say what I want. So it's like, at what point is it going to be, is it a class issue? That's what I'm wondering, I suppose. That's the kind of question that's in my head. I'm not asking you to answer it necessarily, but
no, I think it's really interesting. And so many of the bodies that we see, like, you know, I said earlier, I follow lots of fat people online, and, you know, a large portion of them, if I'm honest, are that one body type that's got the kind of thick thighs, big ass, small waist, like Kardashian-esque, and it's so hard to to even find people who feel confident enough just posting their natural bodies, you know, like there's obviously like some kind of shift socially where bigger bodies are more acceptable, but there are still parts that are just so disgusting to society, you know, like saggy tummies or like saggy boobs. I actually was doing a fair, I don't know, maybe 2 years ago in a little library in, where was it, like Streatham or Brixton, and I had a print on display that was a bunch of people in swimming, like bathing suits, and a couple of them were not conventionally attractive. Most of them weren't conventionally attractive. And one in particular is a kind of like ginger woman with hairy legs and stretch marks and a kind of like non-symmetrical face. And a little girl who was about 5 or 6 came over and she was looking at all my stuff because it was pink. She picked it up and she was staring at it for ages and she said, "Oh, why are these so ugly? Why are they ugly?" And it was a really beautiful moment, like a teachable moment, I think, where I was like, you know, why not? Like, all different types of people exist and they are valid and they deserve to be drawn, and it's nice to look at all different bodies. You know, why do you just want to look at the same type of person over and over again? It's really boring.
That I think is actually the crux of the matter there. The people who want to look at the same body over and over and over again and refuse to accept the bodies that have got diversity. Mm-hmm. What they're looking for is repetition and rhythm. Mm-hmm. It's almost like whereas for us, we find that fucking boring. Mm-hmm. That's boring. So I just noticed that my language does not get mediated on this, whereas you're really good at presenting yourself without any swear words. That doesn't happen for me. Could be because I'm a pint and a half ahead of you. She's on tea, by the way. I'm just going to put that in there. Because she's a clever girl. I'm not. It's that diversity of bodies that I seek. I don't want rhythm. I don't want something that I can predict. I want something new. Mm-hmm. I want something interesting. And there's some people out there who do genuinely want to be comforted by seeing the same thing over and over and over again. And that's, for me, there's a sadness in that they feel that they have to know what's coming. It's almost like a disinterest in uncertainty. I love risk-taking. I'm a big fan of risk-taking. And some people just don't want to take risks. Some people just want to see the same thing and feel secure that they know what they're going to see next. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that is a large part of it, which I grew up with a level of uncertainty, even though it wasn't apparent to anyone else, because my parents hid how fucking poor we were so well. Mm-hmm. But I was aware of it to everyone else, but I was aware of how insecure that our lives were. So I was used to this level of uncertainty. I'm like, what the fuck's going to happen next? Who knows? We're going to have pasta. Are we going to have nothing? Like, what is going to happen tonight for tea? Who the fuck knows? And so uncertainty isn't as much of an issue for me, but for some people, they need to know what comes up next. And if they are presented with something that is different, it's unsettling and uncomfortable for them. And that, for me, I feel very sorry for these kind of people, you know?
I think there's a level of being someone and you're like presenting your partner, like a level of wanting to present this kind of nicely packaged, like small or average sized person as a reflection of your success. Yeah. Like if I have a fat partner, then what does that say about me? That I'm not worthy of having a conventionally attractive partner. I'm not successful enough. For me, I love textures. Every time I go in a clothes shop, I feel all the clothes, and I feel kind of the same about bodies. Like even my own body, the way that it changes, and like the different bumps and the different curves, and then like light, and when I sit and it changes, and it's beautiful to me. And having partners that really reinforce that, and like really spending time with my own body as well has kind of changed that and allowed me to also like unpick the idea that having a thin partner is a measure of success.
That is very fucking true. I actually aimed for having someone who has more to their body than thin. I can't imagine, like, for me, I
just want something a little bit funky, you know? Give me a tail, give me a weird bump somewhere, just like, I want something interesting.
Same as me. Like, I mean,
that's not in any way saying that like thin people are not attractive, because they absolutely are.
But I do want my thin person to have a tail.
Yeah,
that is really important.
Just a little sneaky horn somewhere as a treat.
A weird birthmark.
Oh yeah.
Oh, I love a weird birthmark.
Is it a bruise? Is it a devil mark?
Is it a bite?
Guess we'll find out.
I'm really into that. Like, I really hope that someone will look at my body in the future and be able to go, oh my god, their body is so interesting. I mean,
look at your body and think that.
Oh, we should get married.
Yeah.
I know that, like, Saoirse said it the other night as well. Saoirse said this continuously to me since I ever showed her my stretch marks the very first time. She's like, it was when I was wearing a crop top and I was outside Generator and I was building the benches are outside. I was helping build and paint these benches, and I had a crop top on and jeans now, and so my belly was exposed for the first time to these people because I was feeling confident. I'd lost some weight, but I still have severe stretch marks from the pregnancies. Like, they're extensive. And Saoirse came to me afterwards and was like, I could not stop looking at your stretch marks. They were so beautiful.
Don't objectify me, Saoirse.
I know, Saoirse. Stop looking at me. But like, it was the way she said it. I never felt like it was observed in a negative way. She was genuinely intrigued. And then a couple of nights ago, 2 nights ago, when I just poked at my belly and showed her I was making a point about something, she's like, oh, I love your stretch marks. And this is a woman who's got a self-admittedly conventionally attractive body, who hasn't experienced watching, like, for me, the stretch marks since I was 18 when I had Roddy, they were seen as being, for me, a blemish, as something unattractive, and she saw them and looked at them and thought they were so amazing. And when I was 18, actually, my friend Ranald, when he saw my stretch mark, he's like, wow, there's like tiger stripes or thunder strikes.
Oh,
Which was such a sweet thing to say to someone whose body has just horribly changed under some dramatic circumstances. And it's really kind for people to say that, but I'd never felt that way about them. I always felt like it was just... And there has been people who have said horrible things about them, like, don't get me wrong. Like, and I feel like that for them to say that stuff, actually, I can get angry now as it being like a class issue, a misogyny issue, lots of different issues for them to say that. But more importantly, I understand that when they say that, it's a fear of themselves and a fear of what they hold themselves. Because how in any way is my stretch marks offensive to anyone else? Why is my stretch marks the fact that I carried life in my belly? Why is that offensive? You know. In fact, they're quite cool. Do you want to see them?
I love them.
Oh, they're silvery now. Sorry, we were talking about art school and the elitism that comes from it, but also I suppose what we're talking about was the imposter syndrome, I suppose, right?
Yeah. That
you feel that you experience from not having the art school experience, yet being an artist. That's like being an artist in her own right, who has actually developed her practice out with the art school experience, but not have it was the discussion was actually about having the language to communicate it.
I think actually what really changed my mindset was having a partner whose PhD is about artists with, like, learning disabled artists, and looking at, like, community spaces, and the crux of it is, like, why do we consider learning disabled artists these community spaces where they go do art? Why is it like that's a nice thing for them to go do? Why don't people consider them artists? Why isn't it like, let's put a show on for these people? And trying to understand that, like, everyone's art is valid and valuable and comes from an individual place, and that really made me feel like my experience is valid, and like you can only really make good work about what you know and where you come from, and like people will connect with that, and that it doesn't matter if you went to art school, it's just as good, and that's cool.
Yeah, like, I mean, me in my early art school days, I genuinely had that kind of thought of like, this is art and this is not art, because I was under the impression that quality control somehow justified my own art better. And that came from a place of insecurity. That came from a place of me not actually thinking that it's like, well, I've done this, so this proves that I'm an artist. I've gone through the art school process, so therefore I must be an artist. But that was genuinely from a place of insecurity. And having grown now and gone through the process of understanding the elitism that comes from that, and how I was enforcing a hierarchy that was not only damaging to other people but damaging to myself as well, like, and how that was in itself, it was exclusionary and horrible. So what, me being 25, 26 and having just started my art school career and thinking that by excluding other people that made my art more justifiable or more valid, and going through the process of learning about inclusion and learning about how other experiences are just as valid and other people's creation is just as valid, was a huge moment for me of humbleness and going, fuck, you maybe need to address this, understanding that it came from a place of insecurity, coming from a place of fear that my own art wasn't in any way valid. But now understanding that it's like, God's sake, you're a bit of a dick back then, really, fucking hell. And I remember that we had this conversation in Cambridge.
Oh God, what a day!
I'm so sorry.
Ooh. Yeah, I think understanding that if you, like, the parameters of being an artist are like a checklist of two things. Like, are you human? Can you interpret the world?
Yeah.
That's it. Like, if you're someone that can interpret the world and you make anything, whether it's like, you know, you paint a rock or you do a dance, you're an artist. Yeah, I think I've probably gone 360. Like, when I started, I didn't call myself an artist. I was like, I'm an illustrator. I just do my silly little drawings. And then when I got some recognition and a bunch of paid work, I really felt the need to like intellectualize my work, and people would ask me about it and I'd have to try and reach into this deep place. And I don't think any of it was untrue, because there were like feelings that the work came from. But now I've come back to a place of like, this just makes me feel nice. Like, when I make this work, I look at it and I feel nice. And like, you don't have to have a piece of art in your house or in an exhibition that you're like, wow, that really makes me think about it makes me want to like destroy capitalism or like think about something big. It can just make you feel some type of way. And I think people don't think enough about that, about just feeling good or feeling bad or feeling, they just want to put a white plaque next to it and like a big text that really explains it and makes them look smart. And there's just so much ego attached to that. And if people took away the ego and made work for the world, to put it out into the world rather than for the recognition, you'd probably get a lot better work.
Yeah. I mean, as soon as you take ego away from creation, I mean, it's not about who you are, not about what the experience is, not even about your story, not even about communicating, but it's about the act of creating and the act of making. And that is the beauty of art, is that we're able to make and create and manifest. And that's magic in itself. And obviously we all know how much I fucking love magic. So it is this kind of, like, I find that now, after having gone through the art school experience and been disillusioned by the whole experience and understanding how much it's actually limited my own brain power and made me question so much of what I do, I am extremely apologetic about any kind of judgment I've placed on other people for what they were producing, and me using this word of art as being a validating aspect to what they create. And it's a shame moment, it's a shame moment of kind of like of like exploring, like, why did I feel the need to separate myself from that? Why did I think that it was okay to do that? And I can pass it back to, like, I say pass it back. I take ownership and responsibility, but I also understand that having been in a household where it was like, this is art and this is not art, did limit how I see things. Like, Picasso was art, but what I drew wasn't. Until obviously I went to art school, and then all of a sudden it was.
I think coming from like a working class background, and I say that because you get some working class backgrounds where your parents are maybe really arty or like a kind of hippie families. Let's not talk about those. You're nothing you make is like is considered art? Is it really? Or well, it wasn't for me. It was just, and then you grow up and you go to art school and you have that instilled in you. Like these people, my peers who have come from a different background to me, have this experience of maybe their parents taking them to galleries or being taken to an art class, or they have a deeper understanding of art, and that's probably what's led you to feel like you have to join them in that kind of judgment of other people. Like, I'm one of you. I'm not like an outsider artist. I'm not like a working class artist. That's not me. I'm one of you. I'm one of you. But yeah, thankfully you came out the other side of it and realised that
bullshit,
you are a working class artist, and that's extremely sick.
Yeah. And working class art has its own fucking beauty to it. Like, and that's all I want, really. Is hence why this exhibition is. I want working class culture and the things that we find beautiful to be valued, and I don't have to justify it anymore. I'm past that. I'm past having to justify why the things that I find beautiful are beautiful. Like, when I walk through the Linky corridor, which is a tiny little bit of woodland next to a burn that goes through the outskirts of Elgin, and I look at the place and it's covered in litter, and I know from my art and culturally acceptable mindset that is ugly, but I just don't see it that way. I see that as evidence of human activity. And I see, this person was eating fucking chewits. They've left their chewit wrappers on the floor. Isn't that nice that they had a fun chewit experience? That's immediately what goes through my head. It's not dirty fucking minks. They've just left their chewit wrappers everywhere. Who do they think they are? And I know that there's two mindsets there. And the reason why those kids left those chewit wrappers there is not because they thought about how they were making a mess of the Linky corridor. They were just eating their chewits and having a great time, like not thinking about where the litter went. And I'm aware that there's a duality to the way I think now because of this enforcement of perspective, and I almost hate it.
It's existence is a pain. I think there's something really hard about being a working class artist and like making or trying to make work that is accessible and that other working class people will like, because it almost feels like you're, especially if you have gone through art school, you maybe not succeeded as an artist. Like, you should make art for who? For like the middle class, for the upper class. And I think Lewis does a really beautiful job of that, where it's like you can make work for working class people. Like, they deserve art too. They deserve to enjoy it. They deserve to put something up in their house or see something at an exhibition and be like, this is for me and I understand this and I can understand this experience in a way that they might not look at Picasso and feel particularly inspired. That's
like, Picasso's a really good example of that as well, because like Guernica is inherently a class work. Like, Guernica being the very, very famous work of Picasso's, which describes the Franco's bombing of the town Guernica, which massacred like the whole place, and that was because of the anarchists, the Spanish anarchists uprising that threatened Franco's political domain. And that was a class painting. That was a class painting. That was a class-inspired work. But Picasso himself was not a working-class artist and exhibited extremely problematic ideals. And almost in a way that is, that is appropriation. And oh dear, all these people suffered for like, and I'm gonna make a political artwork about this horrible thing that happened to people who had no one. Like, and there's problematic parts of that where it's like we see like Picasso as being an elevated person who talks about social values and ethics and all something like that. He's a fucking asshole who talked about burning women after he fucking slept with them because he's a cunt, and he's also a pedo, and we don't talk about these things. And like there's a whole aspect of art just appropriating class struggle as being a subject in which to paint from, but not even addressing it. Like I feel like even now in the spaces that I inhabit,
there's this real shift of kind of middle class artists who are appropriating marginalized experiences over and over, and it just happens so often. And it's like, yeah, these experiences aren't yours to draw from because they're not like spicy, they're not exciting.
Spicy.
Yeah, you don't. I just really feel like you shouldn't reap the benefits of a traumatized life if you've not had to suffer through it. No free clout. Yeah.
Oh, 100%. Like it's.
But also saying that, I definitely, I don't know, I would never really think of myself, I'd never think of like in a bio or as painting myself as a working class artist or using that as a descriptor, because for me I see it as a huge barrier, because I am working class and there's such a huge amount of shame attached to that. Like I want to be like the middle class artist. I want to be perceived as like clean and nice and well-to-do and easy, and working class has this stigma of like, oh, she's going to be difficult, she's going to ask for too much money, her work's going to be rough, she's not going to be
do you want to put you by a different name in this?
And yeah, so I don't know, worth me doing some self-reflection there, I guess.
Well, no, I think both of us, I mean, I can't speak for anyone else, but I am assuming this is something that goes across the board as well. I know many working class artists who have the same feeling of going like, I don't want us to be seen as working class because they're going to automatically assume stuff about me.
Yeah.
I went to an interview for a well-known arts establishment based in a fancy house in Angus. I went to an interview for this position of project manager, and I was told by the head of this, the director of this organisation, when I asked what steps they were taking to include the localised community, which is a predominantly working class, they told me, we are what we are.
We are exclusionary.
We are exclusionary, is what she was saying. It's like I was asking the specific thing, like, as that being a massive part of my practice.
We don't want your working class money. That's not
your money want nothing. Yeah. We don't want you types in there. And funnily enough as well, when I was getting a tour of the grounds, I was told by the general manager, we have a barrier that prevents the local community coming into us. And he immediately said, not that we want barriers.
Okay, hun.
It was like, coast over, bro. And that was a shocking moment for me, was me realising that the inclusionary values that I held were not held by other arts establishments, even though they were held by EDI policies that were part of their funding streams from Creative Scotland, from National Lottery, from other funding organisations that required them to have EDI policies in place. They were willing to show them shallow attention in the hope that they would be able to still continue their elitist values. And I was genuinely shocked and disturbed by that. Like, it kind of shocked me, because like, what purpose do these art organisations have unless they're meant to be representing the culture of the localised community around them? And clearly, they've got no interest in doing that. But
extremely frustrating, because especially in like rural communities, if you're working class, you don't need art, but like, it's such a nice little extra to have. Things that are like shows that are free, things that are accessible, and a lot of the frustration for me as an artist comes, like, saying earlier how I feel oddly about presenting myself as working class, is seeing artists who I know are definitely not working class present work as marginalised, and then being paid for that as well. Yeah.
There's a good few examples I can think of from my head straight off, and it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, and I think those types of organisations that you are talking about are ones that typically will have exhibitions or work shown by people who talk about those experiences as a kind of a funding stream. We'll have this type of show, but the actual artists themselves, they're just talking about that experience, it's not them. Yeah,
it's infuriating.
Truly.
Because I think if we were to be able to give working class art the same level of platform that we give to middle class and upper class art, if we were able to give that opportunity and give it the spotlight that it deserves, we'd start to see the world in a little bit more of a different way. Like I often talk about how my favourite piece of street art that I ever saw was someone who spray painted the Nisa logo on a wall. And for me, that was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen, because that person who'd done it to such a beautiful standard. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't an exact replica, but it was enough for you to understand what that brand was. And for them, they'd seen that image repeated so many times to them that they decided to repeat that as art on a wall, because to them, that was art. And in a way, that is. What they've done is they've taken in information from their surroundings, and they have taken it and replicated it in the way that so many other artists do. I really fucking hope the person who did that wasn't a middle class bitch being ironic. There's still that.
Maybe it was Nisa, the company. Maybe it's a kind of guerrilla marketing technique.
Oh my god, I love that. I'm gonna start doing spar everywhere. I'm gonna do that little fucking conifer tree.
Yeah. Oh my god.
But like that. For me, that was a perfect representation of it. It was like what we see on a regular basis, and then we intake that into our subconscious, and then what we transform that in our brains, and then we exude that within art. That's what we all do as artists. So for someone to take a brand that they see on an everyday local basis and then put that out as a form of art, like that was so beautiful to me. And like I feel like that's something that needs to be replicated. We are bombarded with brands continuously, yet we seem to filter out that in favour of other things that we think is art, but we don't think of brands as art. But brands are, in a certain way, art forms. I mean, they still form the same, they follow the same structure as what art does. Just because it's not a beautiful painting of a Bob Ross tree does not mean it's not still valid.
Arguably, this is marketing power, but arguably branding is art, but it's just more targeted to you. It's built specifically so that you will like it.
Yeah.
Especially for you.
Especially for you. How good was Neighbours? I fucking love Neighbours.
You're in a big soap opera hype today.
I really am. I was talking about it the other day.
EastEnders or die. But yeah, on the back of what you're saying, not every piece of art, but the majority of art that I've ever stopped and thought, wow, I really feel something here. It's not been in a like Goma or whatever. It's been on a street corner or on my phone or in a zine. Because it feels like there's this, I don't know, as soon as things get into a white cube space, it's had to go through a level of thought, and it just gets stripped back and distilled, and it's perfect and polished, and it just makes me feel a bit gross. Whereas when something's on my phone or in the corner, I'm like, damn, yeah, I really feel it. I love it.
I think the white space is like the white cube is a very interesting space in which to kind of like present work. There's an elitism that comes from that whole kind of gallery context. And as soon as you put anything into that gallery context, it suddenly becomes art.
Yeah, it's profound, isn't it?
Whereas it doesn't have to be that. Like, I mean, I feel like that it's art within art with an ERT, not an ART. When it's put in a white cube, it suddenly becomes exclusionary. Whereas the art forms that can come through in accessible forms, like through your phone, through Instagram, through Facebook, through whatever, that is so incredibly inclusive. And everyone has access to those things.
Even the physical barrier of you can't touch this, or it's in a frame, or it's so like physically just like guarded, and it kind of puts you on edge. It feels like you can't own it.
Yeah.
Whereas, if I screenshot something on my phone, I own that, and I can set it as my screensaver, and I can look at it every day, and I can take joy from it when I want to.
Perfect.
But it feels like a limited, white cubes are just like a limited snippet of.
My experience of the Fruit Market Gallery in Edinburgh is exactly that. I mean, the amount of times I've gone in there, and there's this one guy who every time I'm in there is guarding me like an absolute dog. And I can remember this one time, there was a Jim Lambie exhibition, which was so tactile. He'd put paint stripes all through the gallery, and I just reached out to touch the paint, which I was walking on. I was walking on with my feet, and I went to touch it, and he told me off for touching it. And I was like, what the fuck is your problem?
How dare you have an experience?
Yeah, it was like, it was genuine gatekeeping attitude of like, you're not allowed to actually physically touch this. You're allowed to accidentally touch this with your soles of your feet, but you're not allowed to actually touch it with your hands on purpose. We have to respect, and it just made me so angry, because that's not what that work was about. Mm-hmm. That work was about interpreting the space differently, and my hands are one of the ways to do that. And it's not even just a case of class in that way, but and I think that's a big part of the barrier for people who are of different classes, is like, how do you behave in a gallery? Mm-hmm. And if you're not used to a gallery environment, you don't know how to behave in that. So
oh my god, they make me so anxious.
Oh god,
so anxious. Yeah, I feel like I'm being watched, like I'm a naughty child. And you know, I guess with a lot of working class people, there are a lot of like disabled people as well. There was a show that I went to in Tate Modern in 2018, I want to say. I can't remember the name of the artist because my brain is a cloud, but it was the most inaccessible thing I'd ever been to. I mean, I'm able-bodied, but every single piece, it was a bunch of different rooms. You couldn't like visibly see ahead of you, and then there was like a giant piece in the middle that had stairs, not a ramp. And I can't believe that this kind of stuff is happening in like this time, you know. It seems mad to me.
That particular exhibition was by a very, very famous artist.
Yeah.
Who is very well known, and the Tate itself is a very well known place which should have EDI policies in place that shouldn't have actually gone
there. I mean, their whole argument, I think, was that's how the artist intended you to experience it. And it's like, what is he trying to highlight, that it's inaccessible, that there are barriers for disabled people? I don't think so. I think he's just lazy and wanted something to look nice.
I think you're bingo right on there.
And I think kind of what I was saying about ownership of art earlier, the idea of being able to touch things and to not be afraid to get them messy and to dispose of them if you want to is really beautiful. Like a lot of zines and things will sit in my house and they get crumpled, and I'm like, that's fine, because
that's what they do.
Yeah, that's what they do.
They're ephemera.
Yeah.
And ephemera should be
ephemeral.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know? Like, the idea that art should be permanent is toxic. And like that Jim Lambie exhibition, for example, me touching that paint on the floor, that paint had to be removed at some point. So me touching it with my dirty, dirty working class hands, it was not going to damage that work within the space of time that it was there. So the gatekeeping attitude of the gallery assistants, whether that was imposed by the Foot Market Gallery, I'm happy to name, by the way, Dex, or if that was imposed by that person in particular, I don't know. I don't know if that was, because that particular person has called me up a couple of times for nothing. That one person, I know it was him.
Bad energy.
He's a bad egg. He just shouldn't be in a gallery environment. He should be somewhere else.
For me, talking about like the disposability of work, all of the work that I sell, the price point is usually like a £5. I think the most expensive thing is 15 quid. And the thought of, maybe if it's framed like a little bit more, but the thought of selling anything more than that to working class people, so like at a market or online or whatever, it just feels really important to me that the price point of things is accessible, even if you're a middle class artist, or especially if you're a working class artist. And that's not to say that you can't charge more for your work or that it's not worth more. It's just that working class people do deserve to own art, and they should be able to.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. Like, I grew up in my household thinking that my parents owned so much art. Turned out my dad had ripped out the pages of magazines and stuff, and it's really beautiful because like for me, like Guernica, funnily enough, that kind of Picasso being brought up and Guernica being brought up, my dad had ripped out a copy of Guernica from a library book that because he loved that piece of work, and he framed the ripped out picture of Guernica from a library book that he stole and damaged the book and framed it and put it up on the wall. And from, I can't even, it must have been up since I was born, but it was on the wall framed. And I remember spending hours and hours looking at that piece of work because it was fascinating to me. Obviously, the real Guernica being huge and definitely not framed on my dad's wall. But for me, that piece of work was so vitally important. And it did talk of the class struggle. And it talked about all these things done by the wrong person, obviously. But but he ripped it out of a library book and put it up on the wall for me to see and inspire and understand about class struggle and what horrible things happened with fascism. And in that way, like now knowing that's what happened as an adult and not knowing that as a kid, like that was huge. Like a working class person shouldn't have to deface public property in order to be able to show art to their children. Like that shouldn't have to happen. And the fact that art has been made so inaccessible to so many people and to the point where they have to commit crime. Although art that crimes. Is... I'm proud of that crime. I don't think my dad was actually like a criminal. I guess. But it's like, you know, that should never have to happen in order for someone to access art.
For me, we had my gran who had a little bit more money. She was older. She had a tiny, I don't know what size, like a A5 size Salvador Dali print that was in what I thought was a really fancy frame, and it is just mad that like why wouldn't she have bought a bigger one? I always just thought it was so valuable and so precious because it's just this tiny little print, and I thought, wow, that must be worth a lot of money because it's so small and precious. And yeah, that's the only art that we really had in the house. We had loads of art books, but never really any art. The only art we had was like, you know, my uncle's friends, maybe who'd been artists and done portraits of them. But art wasn't in our house. It was just, lots of posters from magazines.
I mean, like, that's what's so beautiful about the kind of the medium of magazines and these accessible forms of artwork is that it does make it accessible to people who are excluded from the art community, who are not able to buy. My dad's able to buy art now, and he has put a lot of money into art now because he worked a fucking horrible job that required a lot of danger money, and that's what he got. And because of that, he was able to spend that money on what he wanted, which was art. Although his art's not like, you know, it's like Alistair Gray prints and like Francis Bogues, who we hate. But a lot of the artwork he has on his walls now are from myself, his daughter, who's an artist, his son-in-law, who was my ex-husband. He's got loads of his art on the walls. He's got his other son-in-law's works on the walls, who's also an artist. His house is full of art, but he's always loved art, but until this moment where he's now 60 and has worked a shit job his whole life, and now he has an art collection, but it was never the art collection that he wanted, and until that moment he was having to tear shit out of magazines or library books until that could happen. And that should never have to fucking be the case. We should be able to put that sort of shit on our walls all the time, and by denying working class communities the ability to put things that inspire us on our walls. That's why we have Pinterest, you know?
I'm sure, have you seen the kind of NFT discourse? I guess the idea is it's like, you know, cryptocurrency. It's like that, but instead of currency, it's like art attached to it. So I would have a digital piece of work and you could buy it, but it would be the only one, and you would pay a kind of obscene amount of money, and I send you the digital file.
Oh my god, I remember someone talking about this when I was in like third year art school, and I was like, this doesn't make any sense. I don't understand what this is.
And the whole thing takes an obscene amount of like power to generate the whatever like blockchain that's attached to it, and it's really bad for the environment. But it's interesting because I always imagined a future where we would have digital screens in our houses and we could just kind of go on Pinterest and like screenshot something or tip the artist and just have what we want. But I really hope we're not going towards a future where digital art is like gate kept as well, you know, because that feels like the era that we grew up in. We're very lucky that we didn't have, I guess your dad did, but we didn't have to get books. We could just go online and Google something.
I guess that's a really good point. Like it's an advocate for the whole idea of the universal basic income, right? So like, if everyone had a universal basic income, we all had enough money coming in, including artists. Artists had enough money coming in. They didn't have to really worry about earning money from their crafts, where they knew that they were going to have enough money coming in regardless of what they put out there. It meant that when it was like and when your output is not valued by money, you're able to create an output that can be appreciated by so many more people, not just rich people who can own the thing, but your output can be enjoyed by working class people who would want to rip it out of a library book. It can be owned by middle class people who've just suffered a horrible debt situation. It can be appreciated by upper class people who already just spent all their money flushing it down the toilet. You know, like whatever it is that prevents them from buying it. You know, like that's.
I mean, I guess it's kind of like when you think about a lot of the artwork that's printed onto like Primark t-shirts now, you know, like after so many years it gets put into the public domain. Like, does that have to happen?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Robyn.
Thank you.
Is there anything you want to promote right now?
I have lots of textile and like non-illustration work that I'm working on, so look out for that. I guess that I've been doing lots of needle punch, nice like typography, kind of wall hanging work. So yeah, that I guess.
Get in touch with Robyn, give her a commission, pay her well, she deserves it, and if you don't, I'll punch you in the face.